To Inside Politics, I'm John King. Thank you for sharing your day with us. Turkey launches its promised military assault against the Kurds in northern Syria. Leading Republicans accuse President Trump of abandoning a key U.S. ally, and they predict it will lead to an ISIS resurgence. Plus, House Democrats say the defiant White House refusal to cooperate will not slow their impeachment inquiry. One of Speaker Pelosi's fellow California Democrats, however, splits with leadership and says he thinks a full House should take a vote to endorse the impeachment inquiry so that, in his view, it has more standing. And Rudy Giuliani, of course, central to the allegations the president abused his power trying to get Ukraine to help with personal political vendettas. So Giuliani has been studying history, just not impeachment history.
I went back to read two books about the Salem witch trials. They required witnesses to face the witch, and some witches were acquitted.
The witches had it better, in other words.
They had more rights.
They had it better.
They had more rights.
Interesting theory there. A lot of news to get to this hour, but we begin with the White House slamming the door in the face of Democrats. The president's lawyers declaring in a brazen, angry letter last night that they won't cooperate at all with the House Democrats' impeachment inquiry. Quote from that letter, President Trump and his administration reject your baseless, unconstitutional efforts to overturn the democratic process. Your unprecedented actions, the letter says, have left the president with no choice. In order to fulfill his duties, President Trump and his administration cannot participate in your partisan and unconstitutional inquiry under these circumstances. The House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, firing back overnight, warning the White House in a statement that, quote, continued efforts to hide the truth of the president's abuse of power from the American people will be regarded as further evidence of obstruction. Mr. President, the Speaker went on to say, you are not above the law. You will be held accountable. One Democratic member of the Intelligence Committee telling CNN earlier today the White House letter is a stall tactic, and he predicts it will not work.
The subject of an investigation doesn't get to say, hey, I don't want to cooperate here. Subpoenas will be received by all of the people that the Congress wants to talk to. They will ignore those subpoenas at their peril. You don't get to say no to a congressional subpoena. So I imagine that we will eventually get to talk to these people.
But also on CNN today, one of Speaker Pelosi's most loyal supporters, a fellow Californian, suggesting the Democratic leadership should now bend its strategy to deal with that White House letter. CNN's Mano Raju live on Capitol Hill for us. Mano, is there a real debate among the Democrats about what next?
Well, at the moment, there are Democrats who are pushing for an impeachment inquiry vote, or at least are open to it, although at the moment, that is in a minority in the Democratic caucus and the Democratic leadership. Nancy Pelosi has shown no interest in actually holding a vote for a variety of reasons, but one, saying they just simply don't need it, but also it would lead to some political problems for some vulnerable Democrats. Also, it could take up some time, and some Democrats simply view that as a distraction. But clearly, this is a discussion point among some Democrats, including John Garamendi, who made this point earlier today that it makes sense to call the White House's bluff.
It's time for us to put a vote on the floor, a resolution for the inquiry, structured in such a way that it can move forward with full power of the Congress behind it. I think that's probably going to come in the next week or so.
What tells you that?
Well, the letter from the White House. Absolutely. They want to fight. OK, then let us arm ourselves completely and totally with the full power of Congress. The votes, I'm sure, are there.
Now, it's very unlikely that vote's going to happen within the next week. But what will happen within the next week is a debate within the Democratic caucus about the exact best strategy to move forward. On Friday, I'm told that the House Democratic caucus will have a conference call. Nancy Pelosi will be on that call. This topic will almost certainly come up next week. There are several meetings that they typically have early in the week where they'll talk about strategy. And Pelosi will hear from her caucus about exactly what they want. So if there continues to be stonewalling, the question is the next step. Some Democrats believe it just furthers their evidence of obstruction of Congress. Others say, let's call their bluff. John?
It is a remarkable standoff, to say the least. Mano, appreciate the live reporting from the Hill. With me in studio to share their reporting and their insights, Sungmin Kim with The Washington Post, Melanie Zanona with Politico, Karen Demersion also with The Washington Post, and Margaret Taleb with Axios. For those of you who wander the Hill, is Garamendi out by himself? Is that just one man's opinion, to put it that way, and not a big view among the Democrats? The only reason I found it interesting was he is a member of the California delegation. That is Pelosi's core base of support. So when he said it, I was like, is he just talking talking or what?
We are hearing more Democrats start to say this, but so far Pelosi has given no indication that that's the step she's willing to take. In fact, there was a federal court hearing yesterday related to the Mueller investigation where the federal judge says, I give a huge amount of deference to the House when determining their own impeachment rules and procedures. So I don't know if Pelosi's going to go down that route. They're really reluctant to be sort of baited into this process debate that the GOP is trying to drag them into. This could be really time consuming. But if Pelosi does decide to do it, it will be because her caucus wants it and not because the GOP is demanding it.
And to your point about the federal judge, Beryl Howell, yesterday saying this is House purview, the courts have traditionally said this is the House purview. When impeachment or questions like this have come before the courts, rare, but the courts have said this is the House. Read the Constitution. The Constitution says the House has this power, which is why the White House letter is so striking, because it's a political document. It was signed by the White House counsel, who's an attorney, but it's a political speech on paper, if you will. I just want to read a little bit more from it. Never before in our history has the House of Representatives, under the control of either political party, taken the American people down the dangerous path you seem determined to pursue. Put simply, you seek to overturn the results of the 2016 election and deprive the American people of the president they have freely chosen. Well, anytime the House impeaches, and again, it's very rare, yes, the effect would be to overturn the results of the election, like when the Republicans were impeaching Bill Clinton, a Democratic president who was in his second term, but they were trying to overturn the results of the 1996 election. Were they not?
Well, and the fact, if you end up successfully convicting the president after an impeachment, that is what does end up happening. Yes. I mean, look, the 8-page letter is basically a formal presentation of things that we have known for a very long time, which is the White House does not like this probe, wants the House Democrats to go away and stop bugging the president. And they just put this out there. It's not really a specific response to any particular move that the Democrats have taken in the last week, though we've seen new subpoena fights crop up. And that, and what's noticeably missing from this is that as much as they're saying you really need to put a vote on the House floor, they're not saying what they would then do if that happens. And so the question, I mean, look, impeachments, yes, we talk about legal procedures and we talk about court fights, but they are fundamentally at their base a political act. So the question that Nancy Pelosi has to weigh is if she meets the White House at their bluff call or whatever it is to hold that vote on the floor, what does she get? Does she get the White House compliance? Does she get people actually showing up and ponying up documents for those subpoenas, the individuals that they wanted to pose? And does she get any easier argument to take to the campaign trail, which is her other concern, right? If they vote on impeachment too early, does she lose the message when she's trying to project that for keeping the majority in the House in the House for Democrats and winning it in the Senate and challenging the president in 2020?
And as you jump in, I just want to get this in because a lot of people have gone to their partisan corner. If you're a Democrat, you're for the impeachment inquiry. If you're a Republican, you're not. Whatever you think about it, whether you think it's a good idea, it's a bad idea, gone too far, there is this thing called the Constitution. And it's not just the Democrats saying that the House has this authority under the Constitution. The majority in the House can do this. This is Greg Nunziata. He's Marco Rubio, Republican, former general counsel. Wow, this letter is bananas, meaning the White House letter. A barely lawyered temper tantrum, a middle finger to Congress and its oversight responsibilities. No member of Congress should accept it, no matter his or her view on the behavior of Pelosi, Schiff, or Trump. Things are bad, things will get worse.
Yeah, I mean, the letter sounds a lot like Trump, like saying what he's thinking, and then a lawyer being like, all right, I think I can put that into some legal language. Let me give it a shot, right? It's basically like the lawyer version of Trump dictating a statement from the press secretary on the airplane that gets passed back to everyone. If anything, to me, this letter pulls Nancy Pelosi in the other direction, makes her double down. There's one reason, and I think probably one reason alone, why she would feel compelled to formally vote on an inquiry, and that is if a court tells her in no uncertain terms, I would have ordered that this person needs to testify, but because you've not voted, I won't. If you had voted for a formal inquiry, I would require that the White House turn over the transcripts of every call we really want to see, right? But until that happens, what's the motivation? Like, does she have any reason more to believe after yesterday's letter that they're going to be forthcoming? They've just shown their whole hand, which is like, we're not giving you anything unless a court makes us do it.
You mentioned the letter, and then the president just reinforcing, you're right, they took, I'm going to read some presidential tweets. The letter was slightly more tame than these, but it's the same point. A total scam by do-nothing Democrats for the good of the country. The witch hunt, he misspelled witch this morning. The witch hunt should end now. The whistleblowers' facts have been so incorrect. That's not true. The president keeps tweeting things that are not true. The whistleblowers' facts have actually been substantiated by everything we've ever seen. But the president continues to rant about this, which is his effort to keep Republicans in his corner. This is a loyalty test from the president.
And even before this letter came out, Democrats, you were already seeing a lot of impatience from Democrats Democrats. And that's why, we had reported that, they're not going to wait for the courts to weigh in on the validity of their subpoena or their investigatory powers. They were going to go package all the defiant actions together into one article of obstruction of Congress. And that's why Margaret is totally right. This only emboldens the Democratic position, and despite the few outlier voices for now, just to really go at what they're doing. I think there is most of the support in the caucus for that.
I just want to bring one more thing. The White House now brought former Congressman Trey Gowdy loosely into its lawyers. I don't think he's officially working for the White House, but he's going to help out. Right. He's going to help out. I view him more as he knows the House. He's not a lawyer. He's there to whip, to count among House Republicans to work it. But I just we like to, track consistency or inconsistency here. This is Trey Gowdy. When the House was in the majority, he wanted documents from the Attorney General, Eric Holder. The Obama administration was resisting that. Trey Gowdy taking a bold stand for the House.
The notion that you can withhold information and documents from Congress, no matter whether you're the party in power or not in power, is wrong. Respect for the rule of law must mean something irrespective of the vicissitudes of political cycles.
I agree.
There's so many great clips. We've seen Lindsey Graham clips. We're going to see Trey Gowdy clips. We're going to look, especially the bunch right now that's defending Trump. Pompeo as Secretary of State, Gowdy on the legal team, Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan on one of the committees that's being involved in this inquiry. It's the Benghazi team back together again, just on the other side of the fence. They, of course, argue that there are nuances that make this very different than what the other case was. And
that's a Republican president.
There's
the nuance.
They argue other specifics, but that is the least nuanced nuance.
But that letter.
Well, I mean, the one thing, though, is that Gowdy does know the House, and he knows how to craft a legal argument that's compelling. He's not a slouch when it comes to what he does, and so he's a formidable guy to put on that team.
And he has access to them because of his member privileges, so he could, if there's any sense of wavering or cracks or anything, he can get first. He's there as a scout more than anything else. We'll continue the conversation a bit later. Up next, though, some serious foreign policy issues. Turkey scrambles fighter jets, starts an all-out assault in northern Syria. Watch this, and Arwa makes a key point. These Kurdish Syrian forces, 72 hours ago, were a key U.S. ally. 72 hours ago, were alongside U.S. forces in this fight. The President of the United States decided to pull the U.S. troops out and essentially give a green light. He keeps warning Turkey, don't go too far, don't do too much. But by pulling out those U.S. troops, he's cleared the battlefield for Turkey to go in. And this is one of the areas where you do see rare but very vocal and damning Republican rebukes of the president. This is Lindsey Graham a bit earlier today. If media reports are accurate and Turkey has entered northern Syria, a disaster is in the making. Pray for our Kurdish allies who have been shamelessly abandoned by the Trump administration. This move ensures the reemergence of ISIS. So 2 key points there that he's making, that you're turning your back on people who fought and lost their life for you in the fight there. And number 2, as Arwa made the point, if the Kurds abandon those ISIS prisons because the Turks are coming, what do you do?
It is this is the one area where the GOP is really willing to break with Trump because there's such a fundamental, pragmatic, ideological split here about what is actually prudent to do on the world stage. You cannot fight all these battles against various terrorist groups by yourself. You have to make contracts with people that are local, that do it well, and the Kurds were a really huge ally for this entire regional conflagration fight that we've been involved in. And if you want to be able to secure those allies or maintain your current allies in the future to help you out, you have to actually hold up your end of the bargain, which is not let them sit there like sitting ducks to get slaughtered the second that it's maybe not, conducive to what your current ambitions are. And also, we are talking about 18, 19, I can't even count how many years right now, but almost 2 decades, right, of trying to counter various sorts of offshoots of terror groups that once upon a time did pose an existential threat to the United States within our borders. And, the question, if you just throw that up because you prioritize the people that Turkey say are terrorists over the people that we've kind of identified as the greater terrorist threat, what was all of that for? And the Republicans have been very, very consistent about challenging the president on that front because they think he's trying to
But his view, and he'll get a lot of support in the country, his view will be, we've had American troops there forever. It's a mess, and it's always going to be a mess. So why are our kids getting killed in a mess? That's the president's argument, essentially. The other argument is, of course, the ISIS, you're going to have to deal with this down the road. If you come out now, you're going to have to deal with it in a bigger way down the road, either in Syria or if ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whoever, where they're talking about Afghanistan, regroups. But the president's view is, okay, I've been dealing with this for 3 years. Obama dealt with it for 8 years.
Yes.
The president before him dealt with it for 8 years. What's the point?
I think it's a much more popular argument for him to make on the campaign trail. He ran on this. He can say, I'm bringing our troops home. So I don't know he will suffer politically, at least in the short term. But this is some of the most blistering criticism we have seen from the GOP at obviously a very sensitive time for the president. I think they're far more comfortable, to your point, criticizing him on foreign policy than his conduct. And I also think it's easier because almost the entire conference is united against him on this. They're sort of all holding their hands and jumping, and it's harder for Trump to pick them off one by one.
He has been very un-Trump on this, in the sense that on this one, usually he chainsaws.
Yeah, he said, I respect.
But he says, I respect the difference of opinion. All right, we'll watch as it plays out. Up next, some new reporting about how the president wanted Rudy Giuliani to run the show in Ukraine. The combative White House political standoff with House Democrats comes as we do learn important new details of the events at the center of the Democrats' impeachment case. For example, CNN reporting last night that the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, acted as a de facto gatekeeper on Ukraine, and that President Trump told his energy secretary, Rick Perry, that he and two top State Department officials would have to convince Rudy before they could broker a meeting with Ukraine's new president. A source familiar with the May 23rd meeting between the president, Perry, EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland, and Ukraine envoy Kurt Volker described the key takeaway this way, quote, if they can satisfy Rudy, they can satisfy the president. Asked last night on Fox News if he ever talked to Perry following that May meeting, Giuliani gave a non-answer.
Did you debrief him after the trip or before the trip?
I'm not going to tell you my internal conversations. I talk to a lot of people, not necessarily Rick, though.
CNN's Michael Warren joins our conversation. It is, we talk about the politics of the standoff. The White House says it doesn't want to cooperate. As we get more information about what the Democrats say is the building blocks of an abuse of power, a corruption case against the president, it is striking how many roads lead to Giuliani, how much the president essentially gave him the carte blanche to be the State Department, or to oversee, to be more important than the State Department in this issue.
And remember, this traces back to the whistleblower complaint. This was something central to the whistleblower complaint, that people in the president's national security team were concerned about the big role that Giuliani was playing. Look, I think we should also not forget that Rudy Giuliani wanted to be Secretary of State at the beginning of this administration. He made that very clear. In fact, he's told CNN that recently. I wanted to be Secretary of State. He now has had that opportunity, and it really alarmed a lot of people, sort of in the career level, as well as some of these political folks. But look, I think it's very interesting that Rudy Giuliani sort of is playing this role, and we're learning more and more that, again, sort of confirms that whistleblower statement. As the president has been saying, the entire thing was wrong.
He keeps saying it's wrong. Every piece of information we've been able to corroborate has turned out to be spot on. I mean, not just right, but spot on. Here's Rick Perry, his end of the conversation. Again, listen to all these names as Rick Perry goes through. Yeah, I talked to these guys.
I talked to the president about this. I've had a conversation, a phone call with Rudy Giuliani about it. I've talked to the previous ambassador. I've talked to the current ambassador. I've talked to Kurt Volker. Gordon Sondland, the EU ambassador.
Every one of the people mentioned by Secretary Perry there is a government employee, somebody with the official charge to do this business, except the president's personal attorney, who, I should also mention, as he goes around accusing other people of corruption, his security firm has contracts with overseas people, including, in the past at least, a pro-Russia party in Ukraine.
Yeah, I think this is also why Giuliani has become such a such a focal point for Congress in terms of someone who wants to be questioned. Obviously, Democrats have set him on their sights. The interesting wrinkle in this yesterday is Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham saying he would be interested in having Giuliani come talk to his committee. Now, there are a lot of details that have to be worked out here. Obviously, I mean, we've talked to the committee and said this could be open or closed, and we haven't decided that yet. It could be staff questioning. It could be senators. But we already saw one of the members of that committee, Kamala Harris, who's running for the Democratic presidential nomination, basically licking her chops and getting ready to question Rudy Giuliani. And I think a lot of Republicans told me just privately, they are not sure this is a good idea. They know Rudy is just, to have him constantly out there saying things is not good for the party.
Right, to have his facts challenged, which is not hard at all, and to have the sources of information challenged, many of whom are suspect, especially when it comes to Ukraine, but other stuff, Rudy Giuliani, other past business practices. Again, as we stick to the information building as the standoff continues continues. Here's some more reporting yesterday. A White House official who listened to President Trump's July phone call with the Ukraine leader describes it as, quote, crazy, frightening, and completely lacking in substance related to national security, according to a memo written by the whistleblower at the center of the Ukraine scandal. And then CNN reporting following up on this. At least one National Security Council official alerted the White House's national security lawyers about the concerns. 3 sources familiar with the matter said, a detail that had not been previously disclosed. Unsettled aides also immediately began quizzing each other about whether they should alert senior officials who were not on the call, mainly those at the Justice Department, since Trump had invoked the agency's boss, Bill Barr, multiple times. Yes. So the president says this is all false. All the reporting you do shows across his administration, including people loyal to him who work for him, listened to this call and thought, what in the world is going on?
There are real concerns about bypassing the normal filters and standards by which things come up through lawyers reviewing them, through the career diplomats reviewing them. There being that sort of internal administration checks and balances on, is this the right policy to be pursuing? Is it a good idea? Who's being held accountable? And President Trump, one of his central arguments in the 2016 campaign was that Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, had acted outside of those sort of lanes with the private email servers, the conversations kind of outside of scrutiny or purview. But all of this is an outside conversation with someone who has private contracts. And these are all bypasses on those filters, text chains on personal phones, emails that are not government emails, policies that are not routed through the policy departments. There is this is not just a Democratic concern. Right. This is a bipartisan.
And outside of the process, you very smartly build what the process should be. Outside of the process, he's not saying, how can I help you against Russian aggression? Read the call raised by the White House. How can I help you against Vladimir Putin? He's saying, can you pursue this debunked conspiracy theory about 2016, and can you get dirt on Joe Biden? Can you do a favor? So in addition to the process, there's also the substance of that call, which is, shall we say, outside the norms. We'll come back to it later. Up next, Bernie Sanders changes his campaign strategy after a heart attack. Almost 20 years ago, another Democratic contender also on the trail dealing with a heart issue.
Instead of it going thump, 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 it'll go thump, 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 thump. So, I mean, that's how you feel. You feel it's just not a regular heartbeat. In other words, you're aware you have a heart. Most of us live every day, we're not aware we have a heart. When this occurs, you're aware you have a heart.
Bernie Sanders is acknowledging it's time to slow it down. The senator, home in Vermont, recovering from a heart attack he suffered on the campaign trail last week. He spoke with reporters last night about his recovery, reassuring voters that he intends to remain a force in the race, but also acknowledging his campaign will shift strategy.
Look, we were doing, in some cases 5 or 6 meetings a day, 3 or 4 rallies and town meetings, and meeting with groups of people. I don't think I'm going to do that. But I certainly intend to be actively campaigning. I think we're going to change the nature of the campaign a bit, make sure that I have the strength to do what I have to do.
We won't know until we see him back on the trail. He does say he'll be at the CNN debate next week. But he was known, one of the things that made Sanders so interesting as a candidate was he was the Energizer Bunny. He did do all these rallies. He says he's leading a revolution, and he was incredibly active in doing so. Do we expect this to impact him, to hurt him?
I mean, this could be a setback for him. It also comes as he just posted a massive fundraising haul. He outraised everyone else in the field. So we'll just have to wait and see. As you said, this was part of his strength, was the way he was able to go out there and be so vigorous and so energetic. And I think more broadly, this just brings the topic of age to the forefront for all the candidates. The top 3 frontrunners are all in their 70s, the president's in their 70s, and the candidates also have to be prepared for the Republicans to weaponize this as well. I mean, keep in mind what they did to Hillary Clinton after she had pneumonia and had a dizzying spell. So I think candidates have to be prepared to talk about this issue.
I think it also necessarily just begs the question of what role will Bernie Sanders' campaign be playing in the greater campaign stories? I mean, will he continue to be, considered a front runner for the presidency, or just somebody who's going to be a very loud voice of where the party should be on various policy issues? Because campaigns are very taxing, and that's true, but so is being president. And unfortunately, I know that there's the stories about how Reagan would be done with his work by 5 p.m., but we live in a 24/7 world right now. The current president tweets at 3 in the morning sometimes. You can't just pare down your schedule if you're in the White House, and that's, of course, what everybody who's running right now is hoping to be.
And one of the interesting things throughout the campaign in watching Senator Sanders is that this is a very different race than 2016, when he was more of the alternative to one candidate, the front runner the establishment candidate, Hillary Clinton. Jonathan Martin touches on this in the New York Times. This will just raise the issue of age, which to me has always been the Achilles heel of Sanders' campaign, said Andrew Smith, who's the polling director at the University of New Hampshire. When Sanders ran for president in 2016, he was the not Hillary Clinton candidate, and no one paid attention to how old he is. Now there will be a lot of attention to how old he is and how old Joe Biden is, as you note, and Elizabeth Warren. Is that the issue, the vigor, or how does this get processed?
Well, everyone's in their 70s that we're talking about, but Elizabeth Warren is on a completely different end of her 70s than Bernie Sanders and than Joe Biden. And I think this will emphasize this. It also changes. It almost adds like a touch of like a grace note or a humility note to this discussion of Bernie Sanders and the role that he plays. We have been looking at him in the context of the primary as he and Elizabeth Warren are running in the same lane. He was the dominant guy last time around, but maybe that's because she wasn't in it. He's got the money now, but you see her upswing in the polls. Is it a race between the two of them? I think now that we're talking about this is like a legitimate concern. His health is a legitimate issue for him. It's a concern for him as well as it is for voters. But if you add together the intense loyalty and fundraising, small donor fundraising prowess that both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have, as two people who are competing against one another, if you put that together and compared it with the rest of the field, including Joe Biden, the money blows everybody else away. The number of supporters blows everybody else away. Their combined imprint in the polling blows everybody else away. So I think Bernie Sanders is going to have to figure out, does he have the physical stamina, and is he on a health trajectory to be able to go all the way with this? I think he will right now. But if not, you can understand how he and Elizabeth Warren joining forces together in terms of harnessing the vote and the support would be enormous and seemingly unstoppable in the primary.
Right, and I would just remind people, just don't underestimate him in the sense that because if you look at the national polls right now, he runs third. There's been a lot of conversation even before the heart attack about does he have a path to victory in the race. But he helped rewrite the Democratic rules as well, and you mentioned he raised $25 million in the last quarter. As a candidate in this race, you don't have to win to amass a lot of delegates, and then you see how the race drags out as you go. So I think there's a lot we don't know, but I think the question is we'll see him on the debate stage, number one. 3 hours on a debate stage would be your first test, and that's coming up pretty quickly. Up next for us when we come back, as the impeachment fight escalates in the House, some Republicans in the Senate trying to thread the needle. Republicans trying to navigate President Trump's impeachment fight are getting mixed signals. On the one hand, new NBC Wall Street Journal poll shows the president's approval rating holding steady despite those growing questions over impeachment. On the other, a Quinnipiac poll this week showing a reversal in public approval of an impeachment inquiry, with support jumping 21 points since the end of July. That uncertainty leading many in the GOP, like the Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, to adopt what you might call a take it slow approach.
Even before there has been any considered review, that people have decided that there is either absolutely you must get rid of him tomorrow viewpoint, or he must stay in and no questions asked. There is a process.
Beginning to think that there weren't anybody like that left.
Two or three.
We're laughing about it, but in a way it's not funny in the sense that you have a veteran member of the Senate whose her father was a senator as well, essentially saying, why didn't everybody just calm down? The question is, she says we need facts. Will she stir and push to get those facts? Or is that just a political argument? We're waiting for facts. Or will she come back? She's very well respected by Leader McConnell. Will she come back and say, look, Mr. Leader, we have to have a legitimate process to answer these questions?
Maybe, but honestly, it's not really on the Senate in a way. It is the House's job to build this case and to make the case to the Senate that then sits there as the jury to decide whether it actually holds water. You see
in impeachment,
right? You see that Lindsey Graham is stepping up and saying, I'm going to have an inquiry in which there's so far only one witness, and that witness is Rudy Giuliani, which seems more like a way of kind of poking holes at what the what the House is doing. And Lisa Murkowski doesn't control a committee that would have a direct in on that. But they can make demands from the sidelines like this to say, let's take it slow, more process. But in a way, every time she talks like that, she's bolstering Nancy Pelosi's argument for not putting anything on the floor and to vote down and have more facts in here.
As you jump in, I just want to hear one other thing she said. Again, this sounds very reasonable, which means it'll never happen. This is Murkowski again.
But I'm also trying to think to myself, if this if this set of facts were to be in front of me, and the president was President Hillary Clinton as opposed to President Donald Trump, would I be viewing this in a different way? Because if I do, that's wrong.
Amen. But
yeah, it's hard. It's kind of like hard to see where that all goes. I mean, I think when you look at those trend lines in the polling, you understand how the pressure really falls the way we always knew that it fell, on those swing state senators, on those swing district House members, because you see this sort of flat line in the low 40s of support for the president, and on the other side, which is like 50 and a little bit of change, a hardening, a move towards more motivation to oust him from office, whether through impeachment or through election, but I think I don't know how that translates in terms of a vote at all. And as long as Republicans continue to control the Senate, the impeachment fight itself still at this point ends the way we have always known.
They come back from recess next week. It'll be interesting to see if the language changes from what they've heard at home. We shall see. Up next for us, the acting White House Chief of Staff is Mick Mulvaney. Does the impeachment inquiry put his job in jeopardy? All right, a little lightning round at the end of the show. A couple other quick stories. Some headlines for you here. In the middle of the impeachment, you would think President Trump needs all hands on deck. Mulvaney sidelined as Trump's impeachment crisis rages. The Atlantic says Mick Mulvaney's uncertain fate. About a week ago, CNN's Dana Bash wrote a piece that the president was mad at Mulvaney, and the White House said, oh, come on, go away. That we're still seeing these headlines a week later tells you what?
Well, it tells us that the president is frustrated with both Pat Cipollone and with Mick Mulvaney for not preventing what has been happening in terms of the rollout.
Isn't the better question, is the president happy with anyone?
I see Trey Gowdy's involvement now as a bit of a buffer for Mick Mulvaney. Trey Gowdy is close both with Mick Mulvaney and with Lindsey Graham, and it creates an ally, even if from the outside, for Mick Mulvaney in terms of how to sort of prosecute their defense.
Excellent. An old friend from South Carolina, a friend from the House. Hillary Clinton yesterday, the president tweeted that she should run again. She said, don't tempt me. This in the Daily Beast. The idea that Clinton would mount a third presidential bid has circulated for months among fringe right-wing activists. Now, as House Democrats move closer to impeaching Trump, more mainstream pro-Trump figures are picking up the same claim. I'm going to emphasize the word claim. She clearly, and you could completely understand this, likes to mix it up with the president. She's criticizing Mike Pompeo in an interview that aired late last night, I think, for his role in the middle of this. You could understand that. The idea that she's going to run again, why are the conservatives?
Yeah, conservatives just go bonkers over this, obviously. But I think part of it is that Republicans are trying to make the argument that impeachment is all about undoing the results of the 2016 election. Perhaps this theory can bolster that, and I wouldn't be